Oh, don't go away because I'm not sure this is.
I'm staying here. Yeah, you're on. I'm getting it right now.
Hey, Tim, can you see me? Yes, there I am.
Yeah.
Great. Well, welcome to Facebook Live. This is Virginia Senator Mark Warner with my good friend, Virginia Senator Tim Kaine here. And we welcome you to a continuing series that we've been doing of Facebook Lives. I hope all of you are safe and getting through these enormously challenging times. And this is obviously not a political event, but I do hope, regardless of who you're supporting, that you'll exercise your constitutional right and vote in these coming, I guess now 11 days. It's I'll just editorially say I don't think there's ever been an election that's more important than this one. And while today we're going to mostly focus on the ACA and the Supreme Court nomination, let me just say at the outset that both Tim and I are here in the Senate. What I wish we were doing, what I believe we should be doing, is putting together another major COVID package. I've never seen a time when there's been as much difference between where the stock market is at and the real economy for so many Virginians is at. And Tim and I both are, as former governors, actually know how to get things done. I would take the difference between where Secretary Mnuchin's at and Speaker Pelosi. If he's at 1.8 trillion and she's at 2.2, let's cut it in the middle and get that relief out to the American public, because it is necessary, needed. So many people who are frontline workers, so many small businesses, so many our restaurants, our teachers, firefighters, cops who need that local government support. But instead, as I'm sure you're aware, we are rushing through in an unprecedented way a Supreme Court nominee, that I think is someone I've indicated that I will be voting against as much as anything because of this process. With 45 million Americans who've already voted, we ought to let the people finish having their say. And then whether it's Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden, they could make that nominee, because so many things are going to be decided by this Supreme Court. One of the most important is the future of the Affordable Care Act, which will be heard by the court literally within 2 weeks of Election Day. And while the Affordable Care Act, we all know, is not perfect, it has been extraordinarily successful in providing coverage to over 20 million Americans. 3.5 million Virginians have gotten protections for, if they have pre-existing conditions. That includes my daughter, who's type 1 diabetic, juvenile diabetic. We were able to take care of her, but so many of her friends with diabetes, without the ACA, could not get by. In Virginia, when we expanded Medicaid, we got 400,000 additional Virginians with coverage. I've still got one of my kids who are under 26. She's still able to stay on her parents' plan, another critical benefit. And what we've seen, and what's been so discouraging, is that, if there was some magic wand way, and we see this from Mr. Trump, and I see it in my race, where my opponent wants to kind of somehow wave a magic wand and say, well, I want to keep protections for pre-existing conditions. I want to keep people on their plans until they're 26. I've got this secret plan. If there was a real plan that could maintain the benefits of the ACA and somehow be better, there's been 10 years from our Republican friends to come up with that alternative plan. They have not. And their efforts to legislatively repeal it, because of common sense Republicans and folks like the late Senator John McCain, they were not able to do it legislatively. So now they're trying to do it through the courts. And so many, in the midst of a pandemic, seniors who would see their drug costs go up, small businesses who who need that coverage now more than ever. The literally millions of Americans who've lost their jobs, who now rely upon the ACA because there would be no other alternative. All this is at stake, and what we want to hear from you today in terms of your questions about the future of the ACA. So with that, why don't I turn it over to my dear friend of 40 plus years, Tim Kaine, and he'll give opening comments and then take the first question, then we'll bounce back and forth. So Tim, take it away.
Well, Mark, I really appreciate doing this with you. And just so you'll know, Mark is on the Finance Committee in the Senate, which has jurisdiction over Medicaid and Medicare issues, huge portion of the federal health care portfolio. And I'm on the Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee, which is sort of the other committee that deals with health issues. So we're on the two committees in the Senate that are really the most relevant to these pressing health questions for Virginians. I, like Mark, wish we were working on a COVID relief bill. The House passed one in May. And I knew, look, a Republican Senate was not just going to embrace the Democratic House plan, but I thought they'd do something. And then we would find some common cause. But instead, the Senate majority didn't do anything in May or June or July or August or most of September. Until late September, they put an entirely insufficient package on the table that even their own members, many of them, wouldn't support. We voted no to it, thinking that could start a dialogue to finally get there, and we were half successful. We started a dialogue with the White House, but just so you'll know, while Democrats are negotiating with the White House and narrowing down differences, the Senate Majority Leader is telling his members and the press, we're not going to do a deal. Don't agree to do a deal. Yesterday, he put a show vote on the floor that was 1/3 of what both the White House and the Democrats agree should be the ballpark number. They put a proposal on the table that was less than 1/3 of that, didn't do anything to help people with rent or mortgages or food aid or SNAP benefits or state and local governments. And so wasn't sufficient. We got to do something sufficient. And that's what we should be working on now. But as Mark points out, the Republicans have pushed that aside in the Senate because they want to get the Supreme Court nominee confirmed. I've been in the Senate since 2013, and I've seen him make three fundamental changes to how we deal with court vacancies. The first one was in 2016. There was a court vacancy in the last year of President Obama. He should have been able to fill that vacancy. Every previous president was able to fill the vacancy, but they blocked any consideration of the nominee. It wasn't that they voted against the nominee. They could have done that, but instead they refused to meet with the nominee, entertain him, have a debate, have a vote. And they did that, and they proudly looked us in the face in the American public and said, this is a new rule in a presidential year. Let the people decide. Let the people decide. Wait till after the election and then fill the seat. We urged them not to do that. We said that history didn't support it, but they said that's the new rule. And they also said, and when there's a Republican president, trust us, we'll do exactly the same thing. That was a fundamental change that the Republicans made in how the court is composed. When Justice Gorsuch was nominated, at that point, the Supreme Court, getting on the Supreme Court required 60 votes to get on. Democrats had maintained that tradition because we thought it was a unique position in American government, should require some bipartisan support. The Republicans decided to change that and knocked it back to a simple majority threshold so someone can now get on the court based purely on a partisan vote. And now they're proposing a third change, having told everybody that there's a new rule, let the people decide. What they're now saying is, no, we're going to rush it. I made a point that when my colleagues look me in the face and they say, this let the people decide rule, don't worry, we're going to do the same thing when there's a Republican president. I suspect a lot of people not in the Senate think, people say things all the time and then they break their word. That's not been my experience in the Senate. When colleagues have told me things, Democrats or Republicans, they keep their word, but they're breaking their word in this instance. And you kind of have to ask why. And the reason is, as Mark has indicated, there have been efforts by the Republicans to terminate the Affordable Care Act since the very day it passed. During the time I've been here since 2013, dozens and dozens of votes to get rid of it. One, the most dramatic moment in my political life, when John McCain cast the vote to save the Affordable Care Act in August of 2017. The Trump administration has tried to sabotage it administratively, and they filed court case after court case after court case. They see California versus Texas, argued November 10, 1 week after the election, as their final chance. It's like Captain Ahab hunting Moby Dick. This is their final chance to do what they want to do. And just, I got to scratch my head to do the most important thing on their priority list, to take health insurance away from tens of millions of people. We've been living through COVID. There would never be a good time to do this, but to do it in the midst of a pandemic, I just don't get it. Virginians have suffered during COVID, 150,000 cases, I believe, and nearly 3,500 deaths. But a lot of Virginians during COVID, they've at least had Medicaid. They've at least had health insurance that they could buy in the exchange. They've at least had protections if they had pre-existing conditions. Everybody who has had COVID now will have a pre-existing condition for the rest of their life. At least they've had this protection, but to try to take this away in the middle of a pandemic, it's just heartless. But that's why they're rushing the Supreme Court. There's a tradition in the Supreme Court that if you're not in the seat as a justice when the case is argued, you cannot participate in the resolution of the case. The court now has 8 members. 4 have expressed support for the Affordable Care Act. 4 have either voted to overturn it or expressed deep criticism of it. And our colleagues are rushing this seat and breaking their word to us and the American public because they want a justice who they believe will vote to take health insurance away from millions. I just don't get it. I'm 62 years old. I shouldn't be naive, but I just don't get why taking health insurance away from millions and millions of people is such an important priority, that we do it in a pandemic, that we break our own word to do it, that we violate, kind of traditions and precedents of the body to do it. I just don't get it. But Mark and I are sure going to do everything we can to protect Virginians' healthcare. And I'm really glad that we could talk a little bit today. We've got some questions that are submitted. Let me read the first one, and Mark and I will kind of go back and forth. This is a question from Jocelyn in Fairfax. Is the court going to strike down the entire Affordable Care Act? And that's a really good question. Jocelyn is probably savvy on legal matters. The case is being heard on the 10th of November, and the Republicans want Justice Barrett in the seat. That's what they want. The case will likely be resolved by June. And there's a couple of different possibilities. One is they'll strike down the entire Affordable Care Act. That is a significant possibility. That's what the Trump administration is asking them to do. That's what our Republican colleagues are asking them to do. That's what the group of Republican attorney generals around the country that have brought the suit are asking them to do, and they can do it. And obviously that would mean tremendous harm. They could strike down a part of the Affordable Care Act. There's sort of a thing called severability. If you find something's wrong and you can strike that one thing down and not everything, then you're supposed to try to do that. That's a possibility. But even striking down portions of the Affordable Care Act could hurt a lot of people. It's possible they could dismiss the case on some kind of a technical ground, like the parties didn't have sufficient standing to bring the lawsuit. That is maybe not likely, but they could possibly do it. And the other thing they could do is uphold the Affordable Care Act, which we obviously hope that they'll do. The role for Congress is that whatever they do is for us to read that opinion and then try to fix anything that they strike down, anything that they throw out. Well, we're going to want to, as your senators, work together to try to provide a fix so people won't lose coverage. And that's what our goal is. So that's the answer to Jocelyn's question. Mark, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Well, actually, as the maybe the whole Facebook Live audience doesn't know, but Tim and I actually both went to law school together. But he was a much more successful lawyer than I ever was. So I'm going to let his very thorough answer, and much better answer than me, but of all the different possibilities. So let me move to the next question, which comes from Alex from Manassas, who says, all I have is the ACA insurance. And is he going to lose his coverage during the midst of the pandemic? And Alex, the unfortunate answer I have to give you is that threat is real. I mean, it does seem almost cruel and unusual that in the midst of a pandemic where now we've got 8 million Americans who've had the pandemic, and who knows over the next, who's got the COVID, who've all got pre-existing conditions. Now, I don't know whether Alex has got a particular pre-existing condition, but if the ACA is completely struck down and unless we can act to legislatively cure whatever they find wrong, you could end up losing your coverage. And Alex, that might mean, it would go back to the old days where there was no guarantee of coverage, where an insurance company could discriminate against you if you've got one of those pre-existing conditions, and you go back to a place where there would be no additional subsidy support. One of the things I think we need to do to improve the ACA, and Tim's got some ideas, I've got some ideas, is provide some additional support on the subsidy level to try to help bring down some of the costs. We need to obviously lower drug prices as well to bring down overall healthcare costs. But Alex, the unfortunate threat is, even in the midst of this pandemic, even with 8 million more Americans having pre-existing conditions due to COVID, there is the possibility that you could entirely lose your coverage and be thrown back into the days pre-ACA where one, you might not even be able to buy any health insurance. And if you could buy it, there was no restraint at all on the pricing mechanism. Tim, do you want to add anything to that?
You know, Mark, I think I'll go to the next question because it kind of continues the same theme. So this is Susan in Petersburg. Will children with pre-existing conditions lose their coverage? If so, how will they get insurance in the future? Mark talked about one of his children who has juvenile diabetes, which is a lifelong pre-existing condition. And my wife and I also have had the experience. We were buying insurance in 2010, literally right after the Affordable Care Act passed, but before it was really being implemented. And we got turned down twice. My wife was the one on the phone with the insurance companies, and one company said, we'll write you a policy for 4 of the 5 of you. We won't write a policy for your husband. And another insurance company said, we'll write a policy for 4 out of the 5 of you. We won't write a policy for one of your children. And both of those were because of pre-existing conditions. My wife said, hey, there's a law that just passed. You can't tell me that anymore. And they went to their supervisors and came back and said, oh, you're right. We have to write a policy for the whole family. But what the Republicans are doing is taking us back to that day where people will get turned away because of pre-existing conditions. And remember, every American who's now had COVID, and it's, I think, millions and millions, now have that as a pre-existing condition. And so there's a whole lot more reasons why insurance companies can turn you down now than was the case in 2010, just because of the COVID experience. So what would happen? Well, yeah, if the ACA is struck down, the protection that keeps people from being discriminated against with pre-existing conditions goes away. And insurance companies decide, well, we'll take your premium if you're healthy, but if you got a pre-existing condition, you know, you're out of luck, or you can only get insurance based on a premium that's just going to be sky high and unaffordable for so many. So that is very likely if the ACA is struck down. Now, again, I want to assure everybody, there's virtually nothing the Supreme Court can do that the right Congress can't fix. If people really care about this issue, then the key is to vote for people who will protect your health care, because whatever the Supreme Court rules, we'll scrutinize it. And then if they do strike down the ACA, if the right Congress is in place, one that wants to expand health coverage, then we can develop alternatives. You know, I've been struck by my colleagues on the Republican side saying they have a plan, they have a better plan. President Trump has a plan. 4 years have gone by, you know. We're 2 weeks from the election. 4 years have gone by and we've yet to see it. There isn't a plan. You got to have a Congress that will try to provide protection for kids with pre-existing conditions if the Supreme Court does the unthinkable.
Let me build on that for a moment before I go to James from Chester's question, which is you will hear people. You'll hear people running for office. You'll hear from Donald Trump. Oh yes, we can wave a magic wand and keep this most important protection for people with pre-existing conditions. You know, the reason that the protections for pre-existing conditions took place was because all of the market reforms that were in the ACA, the ability to try to have as many people as possible buy insurance, the ability to make sure that you had appropriate risk pools in place. The whole notion of insurance is spreading the risk around because folks with pre-existing conditions do cost more. And you've got to have incentives for people to buy insurance so you don't, so some young person doesn't wait till they get sick and then try to buy insurance. And the idea that somehow the private marketplace, or I've heard from many people, oh, we're going to do more health savings accounts. Well, health savings accounts, in and of themselves, it could be a tool occasionally used to have people save up additional money, but it doesn't do anything for folks with pre-existing conditions. So please, 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 as you, for better or for worse, there is only one law in the country that protects people with pre-existing conditions. It is the ACA. And for all of those who criticize Tim and I, and since it only got through with one vote, we've both been accused of being the deciding vote, and we were both one of the deciding votes to make sure it didn't get repealed. If there was another way, somebody, whether it would be Donald Trump or someone else, would have laid out that plan. Are there things we can do to build upon the ACA? Yes, like lowering drug prices by negotiating, having the government's purchasing power to negotiate with the drug companies. But you've got to keep the framework if you're going to protect people with pre-existing conditions. Let me go to James from Chester, who says, there's so many people who really need this coverage. If Republicans take it away after November 3rd, is there going to be anything to take its place? Well, again, this echoes a little bit of what Tim has already said. We could determine, because chances are the court, while they'll hear the case in November, won't decide it until June. So there'd be this intermediate period, and if June they came down and struck down part or all, we could find a legislative cure. But that legislative cure, if you want to keep the good things about the ACA, you've got to have people who want to build upon the ACA, not simply repeal it. So James, we can, striking down the ACA is the wrong decision. We can try to legislatively fix it, but that fix will only come about if we have majorities in the Senate and the House that are committed to building on the ACA, not simply this kind of pig in the poke plan of, well, we're going to repeal it and then we're going to figure out later. If that goes through, people will go literally for an indeterminate amount of time without these protections.
Let me go to a question, a really good one from Carl in Norfolk. If the ACA is struck down in whole or in part, what demographic groups will most be harmed? I'm going to get into this, but the last one I'm going to mention is a little bit of an unusual one. So first, the demographic groups who saw the biggest fall in their uninsurance percentage were African Americans and Latinos. They had very high percentages of families without insurance, and the passage of the ACA disproportionately helped African American and Latino communities who were underinsured to get insurance. So they will be very hurt if the ACA goes away. Low income families who either have been able to get access because of the Medicaid expansion in Virginia, or because the subsidy enables them to buy insurance more affordably on the exchange, they will be hit hard. Women depend upon the ACA's requirements to get maternity care, protection against higher premiums just because of their gender, and preventive women's health care like mammograms and cervical cancer screenings. Those were part of the ACA. Women will be hurt. Seniors who are in the Medicare Part D donut hole, and if you're in it, and if you're not in it, it's too complicated. Don't worry about it. But there was a fix in the Affordable Care Act to help seniors with prescription drug costs. They could be hit. The sizable group, 133 million Americans with pre-existing conditions, that's a group of people that will be disproportionately impacted. And here's another one. People who always wanted to start their own business. Mark's heard this, and I have too. So many people felt locked into a job because the job provided a healthcare benefit, and they couldn't figure out a way to get healthcare if they went out and started their own business. And I've talked to an awful lot of people who the Affordable Care Act, by putting insurance on an exchange and allowing subsidies to bring the cost of the insurance down, they were able to pursue their own dreams, maybe leave a job that they felt locked into because of healthcare benefits, and then they've gone out to pursue their own dreams, buy insurance on the exchange, and start their own business. It was an entrepreneurship and innovation promoter. This group of people will also be hurt if the ACA is struck down.
Yeah, and I'll go to the next question. I think Tim mentioned this. If he didn't, I'll just reiterate it again. All you folks who are from basically 18 to 26, who in the old days, if you left your family, went out on your own, you had to get your own health insurance. And it's obviously a lot cheaper a lot of times to have you stay on your family plan. That goes away as well. Lori from Roanoke asked, and Lori, this is a hard one to answer. She's a breast cancer and blindness survivor. and was uninsured before Obamacare. What do I do if what does she do if the Supreme Court strikes the bill down, strikes the law down? Well, Lori, you've got Tim and I's promise that we will work our tails off, and we are on the great right committees, the Health Committee and the Finance Committee, respectfully, to try to tailor a new bill to fix the ACA. But why go through that process? And we'd have to make sure we could get the 51 votes. That requires a Senate that will be actually pro-healthcare. We all know at the beginning of the ACA, there were a lot of bumps. We all remember the challenges on the IT system in terms of signing up. If you had to start from scratch, you're going to have glitches, bumps, and a whole series of problems. What we ought to do is take the ACA and build upon it. I know we'll get to a question in a moment. We got a few more minutes here, but that's what we ought to do. And Lori, but with all that you've gone through, Tim and I will be working to, if we have to deal with this, hopefully thing that will not come to pass, but if it comes to pass, we'll work to try to fix it. But I don't want to give you any false impression that even a good fix is going to cause disruption. It's going to cause bumps. It's going to cause a level of stress, particularly if we're still engaged with COVID, that we just shouldn't have to put the American people through.
Here's a question from Meredith in Blackstone, and it gets at the point that Mark was talking about earlier about kids up to age 26. Will people receiving coverage up to age 26 on their family plans immediately lose coverage? And that kind of depends on the Supreme Court ruling. As we said at the top, they could strike the whole thing down, they could strike a part of it down, they could dismiss the case on some technical ground, or they could uphold it. But if they strike all or part of it down, there's a chance, yes, that the protection for kids up to age 26 immediately goes away. Now, remember this, the insurance companies would write family plans. You could get it for yourself, or your spouse, or yourself, spouse and kids. It's just that they were writing plans that would cover family up to age 21. The Affordable Care Act required them on a family plan to cover every young person up to age 26. Now, if the Supreme Court strikes that down, they'd be free to go back to 21, just like they did before. That's what they were doing before. Might some insurance company decide, hey, it would be good for business reasons to offer our plans and keep kids on up to age 26? Somebody might do that, but just remember, no insurance company was doing that before the Affordable Care Act. They weren't doing it. And the thought that they might do it voluntarily when they don't have to, I don't want to take that chance. So I think there's a strong chance that when the Supreme Court acts, if they strike down the act, yes, that protection for young people to stay on family plans to 26 would go away.
Well, let's move to Linda now from Virginia Beach. And my staff here is waving furiously. I think, Tim, we've got another vote, and we're trying to do things to actually see if we can make this process, make sure that you as Virginians get a chance to weigh in on who ought to be the next president, so that the next president ought to decide. I'm not sure we're going to be successful on that, but we're doing our part. And Linda asked, I think, a really great final question. What can we do to plan on building on the ACA to make it better? Let me give you a couple ideas, and then I'll let Tim close out, because I know he's got some really, I think, exciting ideas about public options and buying into Medicare. But I've got a legislation out that really says, what specifically can we do? One thing, Virginia was late in expanding Medicaid, so the number of years we get a full federal match. And there are some states like Alabama that never expanded Medicaid. I think we ought to give every state, regardless of when they choose to weigh in, a chance to get that full federal match for the whole time period. We shouldn't penalize a state because they made the wrong move and consequently penalize so many of their poor Virginians or poor Alabamians or other states. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and give the government the power to negotiate drug prices. There's no reasons why we should be paying 3 and 5 and 10 times. I mentioned my daughter with type 1 diabetic. We go through an awful lot of insulin. And as I pointed out, sometimes it's not given the shot, that's the scary part. The shot is how you're going to be able to pay for the insulin. My family was lucky enough to be able to afford that, but so many families were not. Let's bring down drug prices. Part of my legislation as well says, let's end the practice of surprise medical billing. How many of us have got good insurance through the ACA or anything else, and you go to the doc or you go to a hospital, you think you're covered, and you end up coming out with some $20, $30, $50,000 bill that you don't know comes from where? I mean, that's a problem that has to be resolved between the hospitals and the insurance companies. The consumers should not bear that risk. And then finally, let's go ahead and recognize that if we're going to keep driving down healthcare costs, we are going to potentially need to help support particularly the silver plans, the kind of plans that most people buy on the ACA, with a little additional premium support. I think we can do that. We've seen the costs start to come down. A little additional federal assistance there, I think, would be a step in the right direction. But those are some of the ideas that I've laid out. I know Tim's got some other ideas, and I'll let him go ahead and give those and close out, recognizing that we got to go vote.
Well, and every idea that Mark has on the table are ideas I support. They would all make our system stronger. I have a bill with Michael Bennett of Colorado called Medicare X, and it's kind of the opposite of the Trump strategy. The Trump strategy is destroy the Affordable Care Act. And what Michael and I want to do is maintain it and just add one thing to it. Just add one thing. And here's that one thing. We would direct the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, CMS, to develop an insurance policy that would cover all of the Obamacare essential health benefits and put it on the exchange so that people could buy it if they wanted to. Now, CMS, in developing that policy, they don't have to pay execs fancy salaries. They don't have to advertise on the evening news. They have a low overhead cost. They don't have to collect a profit margin. They don't have to pay state and local taxes. They don't have to return to shareholders. So CMS could develop a policy that would cover those benefits that would be reasonably priced. They already have a distribution mechanism. They offer services in every zip code in the United States. They already have agreements with physicians and hospitals around the reimbursement side. So they would be able to develop a policy that would be very reasonably priced compared to anything else. They put it on the exchange. If you wanted to buy a policy off the exchange, you would suddenly have one more option. In many parts of the United States, you go on the exchange, there's only one policy, no competition. And that means the prices aren't good. If you decided you wanted to buy the Medicare X policy and you qualified for a subsidy under Obamacare, you could take that subsidy and even bring down further the reasonable cost of the Medicare X premium. So what Michael and I want to do is a public option, but it's basically just to maintain the current system and add one thing to it. And that one thing would inject more choice, more competition, and lower cost. That's what we want to do.
Well, I know my folks are saying we got to vote. I'm sure, Tim, your folks are saying the
same thing. And I got a longer walk than you do, so I better get rolling. But Mark, thanks for doing this.
Well, thank you, Tim. And for all who are viewing this, if you didn't get your question answered, try to submit it to either one of our offices. markwarnerva.com is one of the places you can submit to. And, make sure your voices are heard. Preserving healthcare is one of the most essential things that we need to do in the Senate. And obviously, we should be doing that and working on COVID rather than jamming through a Supreme Court nominee. But thanks, everybody. And thank you, Tim.
You bet. Great day, everybody. Good questions. Appreciate it.